everybody. It's me, Derek DC Phillips, bringing you all things frightful. And today I have an especially frightful guest, Vanessa Reid. Hey, Vanessa.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm well, thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. I know it's a great fall day. It's a little gloomy and overcast, so perfect weather for this type of chat.
Absolutely.
For anyone out there watching, Vanessa Reid is a wonderful author. We met, I'm not sure how many years ago now. Has it been maybe 4 or 5?
I think
Something
so.
like that?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, we're both part of the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association. And if anybody out there is interested in joining a local chapter, it's a great place, a great environment to really practice your craft, get together with fellow horror lovers. Even if you just read and want to read, become an alpha or beta reader, there's a need for that. So whether you're an actual horror writer or a fan in general, it's a great place.
Absolutely.
And Vanessa, I wanted to just dive right in about before we get to your new release, which I love and I'm really excited about. Tell us about your interests as a horror reader, writer, and fan. What's your inspiration?
Well, honestly, I started appreciating the genre at a pretty young age. I think I discovered Stephen King when I was probably in the 5th grade. I just remember getting in trouble about the 6th grade reading Stephen King books under my desk while I was supposed to be, paying attention to the teacher in class. I absolutely was hooked when I started to read his books. But it started even before that. I remember when I was even younger, I would buy, or if I was lucky enough for someone to give me a ghost story comic book, I loved those, and I used to create my own version of them. I wasn't a very good drawer, but I could actually write a little bit of dialogue. So I had a great time. I still have a couple of those somewhere saved. But also my father, he played inappropriate television and movies for me. The age when I say inappropriate, I mean, I was probably too young. I remember watching Night Gallery with him, which is definitely that ode to the gothic. And goodness, so many things. Definitely Twilight Zone was a huge influence. And as I got older, a little bit older, Scooby-Doo was absolutely my go-to cartoon as a kid. We actually, a friend of mine in elementary school, we created our own Scooby-Doo gang. And so we would research mysteries and create little stories. It was a lot of fun. So I think I've just always been attracted to sort of the spooky side of things. And as I got a little bit older, discovered the gothic genre. So Jane Eyre was really for me the biggest hook. And I think I reread Jane Eyre at least once every 2 years. I just love that work so much, and so many others like it. Yeah, those have been sort of the things that have influenced me. And then Shirley Jackson, Flannery O'Connor, again, similar personalities in their writing in terms of female writers looking at sort of the dark side of things, but there's also like a cruel beauty to all this writing, which I really enjoy.
I love that. And that's something that you and I really clicked over, I know, was Southern Gothic. We love it. Can't get enough.
Exactly.
It's so hard when somebody asks, who's your favorite author? Who's your inspiration? You want to say all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned making your own Scooby Gang.
Hmm.
I can feel a Netflix limited series, or there's something in there that I want you to explore a little bit more after this call.
I will look into that. No, that was a huge influence. I mean, I loved and it's funny because probably my other favorite show as a young person was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And they're so similar in that obviously you have this group of really interesting characters. And I'm definitely a character writer. I like characterization, to me is so important. But I love falling in love with characters and rooting for them. And so I see the similarities there, and then sort of the humor and the horror together. I love that too. The Dark and Stormy Night is perfect, but you have to break it up with something to help your reader sort of take a breath. So I love that about both of those shows, and the construct of the group of friends investigating a mystery is one of my favorites.
That's great. And I think there's so much there that you just mentioned that resonates with so many horror fans, of being exposed to horror at it, or maybe inappropriate content. I mean, that's in the eye of the beholder, right?
Exactly.
Um, at a young age. I remember I was probably 6 years old, and I would, walk down the aisles at Blockbuster, and I bugged my mom to let me rent Night of the Living Dead.
Oh,
I don't know why. It jumped out at me. And so to teach me a lesson, she said, okay, fine. And I got maybe 15, 20 minutes in, and I was scarred for life. Could not watch it again until I was,
no.
yeah, had a few years on me, but definitely made an impact.
I mean, those things do make an impact. And it's funny too. My husband has a similar experience. He watched The Exorcist as a child, and it absolutely traumatized him. He still struggles with that movie, but he too loves horror. So it's interesting. Maybe it's just that some people watch it and their reaction is fright, but they don't get the thrill that maybe we get from that. I don't know, but I always
Yep,
find it pretty thrilling.
exactly. There's something you just can't let go, can't put down about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you have talked to us about reading Stephen King under your desk,
Mhm.
and I'd like for you to talk a bit about your day job.
Okay. Well, I'm a high school teacher, English teacher here in Atlanta, and I have the honor of working with some amazing ninth graders and 12th graders. So I get to spend time with both ends of the high school experience. For years, I taught middle school and high school before that. So I've worked with most every age group at the secondary level. And my favorite thing to do with them is writing workshop, obviously, but it really is an absolute joy to read others' stories, especially these young people who have such amazing, fresh ideas about what story is. My students are pretty well read, so they do tend to be strong writers. And then being in the writing process with them. So when we're in writing workshop, I try to write along with them and also share with them my work and sort of how terrible it is in the beginning, so that students start to feel like there's steps in the process, and nobody sits down and pounds out the best piece of work. There was an Ira Glass video that I saw years ago where he talks about he wished someone had told him when he was a young writer that the ideas in your mind and the ideas that you can actually execute are two different things in the early writing years. And it takes a while for them to sort of kind of come together, and it takes experience and it takes practice. And I think, when students know that, it takes the pressure off that sort of idea of perfection. And so we talk a lot about that, the mistakes we make. And I'm very honest about my challenges and show them those things. And, but they just have wonderful instincts about writing. And what's nice about working with high school kids is they're kind of at a stage of writing where they have gone beyond sort of the mechanical challenges, and they're, really getting into the more subtle things, literary devices and playing with structure. And so it's a lot of fun. Sometimes I have to curb my enthusiasm because my students aren't necessarily all aspiring horror writers.
Right.
But I do try to bring my interests into the class. So for example, I use a lot of Twilight Zone episodes for instruction. They match really beautifully with certain literary devices. Um, Time Enough at Last is an example with, I think it's Burgess Meredith, and there's a Holocaust, and he's left alone on the planet, and he's so happy to have time to read, and then something terrible happens. So there's great symbolism in that story. So we'll use that to study symbolism and identify symbols and how authors use them. And really, there's so many good episodes for illustrating that. And strangely enough, my modern, sophisticated students love Twilight Zone. Like, it's crazy. They absolutely love them. If I have one for them, they get so excited. So I love those stories resonate, through the decades and with the current modern readers.
Oh yeah, they're here to stay for sure. And I love what you said about almost reconciling those ideas that you have on your head and what you're in your head, and you're actually able to get out and communicate. Because I know anybody who writes has probably seen the memes where it's like the scene in my head versus the first draft, and
Mhm.
it's a horrible drawing.
Right.
But I think that's got to be so encouraging for your kids, because at that age, especially writing, I know for me, for you, for everybody who writes and has written for their entire life, you mentioned you have memories of writing comics as a kid.
Mhm.
It's just such a way to help process your thoughts and how you perceive the world as you're growing up. So having that reassurance, it doesn't have to be perfect the first go round.
Mhm.
Um, that's not always a message that kids hear in their high school classes, right? It's got to be perfect. It's got to be an A quality. So that's great.
We also talk about writing through your ideas and how introductions or beginnings often are, trashed or recycled or used in a different portion of their work because again, just like that first concept of not being commiserate your skills and your insight, but also students are still really trying to figure out who they are. And so a lot of times I'll say, okay, we're going to do this piece and then just completely delete the first paragraph or cut and paste it somewhere else into your draft so you can come back to it later, but you're going to rewrite that intro now that you've completed the rest of your piece. So there's a lot of stuff that they are able to understand and helping them see that is, that they're burgeoning writers. They are writers, but it's not, they're not at the end of their writing game like anyone is, but it does help. It takes some of the pressure off and they're able to be more creative, which is nice.
Well, and I can personally vouch that having a teacher is the best editor in your corner. For anybody watching, Vanessa has edited some of my stuff, and
Yeah.
she gives you great critical feedback, constructive feedback without making you feel like it was garbage. So yeah, cut and paste it somewhere else. Don't give it up.
Yeah, there's always something to use there. But isn't it funny how challenging it is to really evaluate our own work? I think that's something else I shared with my kids. And I know we talk about like, you get to a point when you've been working on a piece for a long time and you're like, I cannot see the forest for the trees. I need somebody else to, really critique this and see what's wrong and what needs to be fixed.
Yeah. And sometimes you come back to it and you say, wow, that really was not half bad. You
Absolutely.
know,
Absolutely.
just new
Sometimes you love
perspective.
it and you share it, and then they're like, oh man, I did it really wasn't as good as I thought it was. That's always humbling.
Yeah, should have kept that one to myself for a
Yeah.
little bit.
It's hard to have a big ego when you're a writer, pretty much.
Oh, yeah, keeps you humble.
Yes.
So you mentioned that kids these days are watching the Twilight Zone.
Mhm.
What are the spooky kids in your classes reading? Is there somebody new, a new voice we should be on the lookout for?
I would be honest, I was more, I think, in touch with that in when I was teaching middle school. I'm still kind of getting my arms around what kids are reading. They're not reading as much, and that's a little bit sad. We do incorporate reading time into our class, but in terms of what they're reading, I don't think it's anything that different from what we read, to be honest with you. And when I finish a book, I put it in my classroom library. And for my kids who like that genre, I'm definitely like, here's what this is about. But there are a lot of books, young adult books out there that are extremely popular um, that touch on it's the high school experience, but there's some sinister element to it. Somebody dies or disappears, and there's just so many stories like that out there for young adult readers. We didn't have that when I was that age. I mean, honestly, it was um, it was really Stephen King. I'm trying to think of some of the other writers that I read at that age. Then V.C. Andrews was a huge influence on me, although I've reread some of that work, and it's interesting to reread it as a grown up or whatever. But I mean, I just remember those sort of gothic ideals that were so delicious to me as a kid. But they were always adult novels. And I think that's why I was reading Stephen King in elementary school, because there was nothing like that. I mean, it was really Goosebumps to me was almost silly. It didn't feel frightening. It felt, and that's good. I mean, it's very entertaining. It should be, but stories to tell in the dark, that sort of thing.
I've noticed that because I've gotten into several young adult or classified as young adult authors lately. And I know even like I read the sequel to Clown in a Cornfield recently.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so interesting to me now. What is classified as young adult would not have been classified as young adult. Like to your point, even with R.L. Stine and Christopher Pine, I think there was still that element of G. Willikers, I'll call it. You know, it's still kind of wholesome, or you realize, oh, it was someone in a ghost disguise all along. But the young adult today is a lot more edgy. And I'm sure kids, teens who do enjoy reading these days, not to sound too ancient, but I think that's probably why they resonate with a lot of these newer young adult books, and actual adults are picking them up because they are a bit more real in terms of how they address the world and violence and the kind of language that people use. There are some F-bombs here and there. Wouldn't have been 20 years ago.
Right. Oh, definitely. Definitely. It is hard to recognize. And I think that the other thing is those books are sort of straddling the line between young adult and adult fiction in a way that adults enjoy, because sometimes you don't want to read the Ketchums of the world, as, amazing as he is. Sometimes the world is just too scary to go into the deepest, darkest places. And so those books sort of provide I think a nice bridge. They're entertaining. They take you out of your present, but they're also not quite as disturbing as I think a lot of adult horror is, and has become more so, especially with like body horror and so many subgenres that are really deeply disturbing. And there's some wonderful writers out there in those genres for sure. But I think the young adult, as a young adult, appeals in a way that keeps us from being too terrified. We sort of know the kids are going to be okay in the end, or at least their protagonist will be. And there's some comfort in that, along with the spooky thrills.
That's so true. I mean, we hear about cozy mysteries. Mm-hmm. You don't really hear about cozy horror. So maybe that is kind of that gap that young adult fiction is filling these days. That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but you're right.
Yeah, I think it's nice to be able to be scared and enjoy the thrill of those stories, but also kind of secretly know that they're not going to go too far, because it is a YA or new adult, even new adult piece.
Exactly. Well, speaking of all of these other amazing writers, let's get to the reason that you are here today. And I'll give a little bit of context for anybody watching. Vanessa Reid's latest short story, Sunday Supper, was just featured in the Corona's fourth book of horror stories. And I have read it. I will not put any spoilers out there into the universe, but I started reading it. Speaking of cozy horror, I started reading it, and it was so comfortable and comforting. It's, I don't know, it felt like the equivalent of a cozy mystery going in. It was very, I got fairy tale vibes. It was very classic, and the cozy element, dang, it goes away at some point. I won't say when in the story.
Yeah.
But tell us what you want us to know about the story, what you would like readers to know going in, if anything at all, or maybe what inspired you to write this story.
So I have a friend who has a cabin in LJ, and I don't know, I was there once, and for some reason, the story just kind of came to mind about a family and their first opportunity for a vacation house, and enjoying the woods. And I love writing about the woods. A lot of my stories are set there because it's a place that I love, but it's also so full of sinister possibilities. Thinking about the Scarlet Letter and how the forest, sort of divides the civilized world from Hester's experience. And I just love that whole trope. So, and I thought about a little boy who is kind of lost and lonely. And when he comes up to the cabin with his family, he meets a young lady who lives nearby. And just in my mind, there was this, how older kids always tell younger kids these scary stories about things that happen. And one of the reasons why his father was able to afford this cabin was because some years before there was a serial killer who was sort of targeting the area, and several children went missing. And so it sort of goes from there, but it's more about their friendship and the relationship that they build together. Elijah is a very sweet, just lovely little boy, but he's not like other boys. He's small and frail, and he loves to sing, and he's just trying to figure out who he is. And in the story, he's able to connect with someone else who he really, almost falls in love with, and has his first real friendship and his first real glimpse of the horror that are human beings.
I love it. And it is one of those stories where in the space of short story real estate, you go through so many different emotions reading this story. And I think that's what I loved so much about it, in that you accomplish in all of your work that I've read, is that there really is this sort of, you really capture the human experience. Your characters are multifaceted, and they can be sympathetic, not so sympathetic. There's so many elements at play. Again, I don't want to ruin anything for anybody going into the story, but it's really great. And I know that anybody who reads it will be very, very surprised by all of the emotions that they go through reading it. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you. It's funny because I had originally submitted a story to Corona Books of Horror several years ago. And it was the story I wrote at the time was accepted. And then Corona hit, and the editor, Lewis Williams, was So yes, I had submitted a story to Corona Books of Horror a couple of years ago, and with the pandemic and the title of the work, Lewis Williams decided to wait, and it was some time until this next iteration. And he contacted me and asked me if I'd still like to include that story, which had actually been picked up by another publication. And so he said, well, do you have anything else? And I just finished this story and had worked with my correct team to get it edited and tightened. And I shared it with him, and he loved it. And he wanted to include it in this collection, which meant a lot. And it's funny, it's the second British anthology I've had work in since I started sort of writing in earnest. And I'm wondering if maybe my style style resonates more with the UK audience. I don't know, but I'm definitely a quiet horror writer. I'm not ever going to, there's not going to be a lot of blood and violence. And I typically don't do monsters with the exception of one story I wrote. So I appreciate the collection. It's really, really wonderful. And we've gotten some great reviews. So I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Definitely. It's a big deal to be in this anthology. This is the 4th edition, and it's very popular, and I love it. I hope this one does just as well as all of the other collections in the series have. So I'm sure it will.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah, maybe you're just very Hammer influenced, right? No, it was all the Hammer horror growing up.
Absolutely. There's never enough Hammer films to watch.
Well, I wanted to also just let people know what you're working on currently. Do you have any works in progress or something on the horizon?
Yeah, I just finished a short story called Mother's Day, and my crit group worked on it with me a couple weeks ago, and it's at a place where I think that I'm ready to start shopping it out there. Also, I'm in the process of outlining my first novel, so that is super exciting, and probably going to try to shift gears with my brain real estate to focusing on that for a little while, because it's time to try a larger work. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to getting into that as well.
Well, let me know if you need any alpha readers. I'm here.
I appreciate that. I will take you up on that.
Yeah, we need a jam session soon. We haven't had a creative jam session in a while.
I know, and they're so much fun. We always have such a great time.
Yep, our characters. We need to dust some characters off. We had some good ones going there for a minute.
We did. I was just thinking about that. Derek and I were working on a book together, and it's been a minute, but it was a lot of fun. And those characters, I keep thinking about them. Definitely.
Yep. I think it might be time, just about.
Love it.
Well, where can people find you before we wrap up today?
So I am on Facebook, and also let's see, let me give you my address here. I have an author page on Facebook. I also have the Girl Who Loves Monsters Facebook page. And The Girl Who Loves Monsters is also my blog. So if you are interested, you can just join me there. And I would be delighted to hear from anyone, readers, other writers. Just love to connect in that community.
Excellent. Well, I know we're all excited to see what comes next, and just can't wait. And I'm so glad that you joined us today for this chat, Vanessa. Congratulations again.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Always. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.